It smelled like rot, silence, and secrets. The kind of silence that clings to your skin. The kind that doesn't just fill the room. It watches you from the corners. The door creaked behind me as I stepped inside, dragging my suitcase across the warped floorboards. Dust hung thick in the air like a warning. The paint peeled from the walls in long brittle strips, like something had tried to escape but gave up halfway through. I could hear the wind pushing against the broken window panes, making them rattle like teeth. And then there it was, in the far right corner of the room. Something barely visible, tucked behind a sheet-covered armchair. My breath caught. I took one step closer, and everything in me screamed not to take another. But I did. And when I pulled that dusty sheet aside, what I found didn't make sense, not right away. But it would. Eventually. That one thing in the corner unraveled everything I thought I knew about my husband, my marriage, and my worth. People always assume betrayal shows up loud. It doesn't. It shows up in documents no one wants you to find. In voices on tapes you were never meant to hear. In empty houses where the walls still remember who abandoned you. And why. They told me he left me nothing. But they didn't know what he hid. They didn't know he left me this. If you've ever believed someone's version of your worth, if you've ever accepted less because you thought it was all you deserved, this story is yours. Because what happened after I opened that door changed everything. If this is your first time watching, pause for a second. Because if you miss stories like this, you'll keep trusting the wrong people and never see the betrayal coming. Subscribe now. Save yourself the heartbreak. The church was packed that morning. Too packed if I'm honest. My husband didn't have that many friends when he was alive. But now as I looked around the room, it felt like everyone and their mother showed up in black, dabbing their eyes with tissues they barely used, whispering stories I'd never heard, and offering hugs that felt more like inspections than comfort. His son sat on the front row, shoulders square, jaw clenched like he was the grieving widow. I sat beside him, quiet, my hands folded over my lap, holding together what was left of my dignity. Nobody looked at me, not really. They glanced, nodded, moved on. I was invisible in a sea of people pretending to care. After the final hymn and a few overly dramatic speeches, the funeral director ushered a select few into a small airless side room. That's where the reading of the will was set to happen. I remember how cold the leather chair felt beneath me, how dry my throat was, how tight the air seemed to get when the attorney pulled out the sealed brown envelope. He cleared his throat, as per the final wishes of Mr. Charles Whitmore, and then, it began. To his only son Nathaniel he left the fully furnished 4-bedroom apartment in the heart of downtown Atlanta. Turnkey. Paid in full. No conditions. Murmurs rose like steam. Someone actually clapped. Then the attorney looked at me. And to his wife of 16 years, he leaves a property. I exhaled, a sliver of hope stretching inside me. A cottage. In Monroe County. Silence. And then laughter. Not loud. Not cruel at first. Just soft chuckles that passed from cousin to cousin, sister to sister, like a private joke I wasn't invited into. A cottage? In Monroe County? Someone muttered, a shack in the woods. Another added, she got what she put in. Then came the whispers, sharper this time, more confident. She never had children. She didn't come from much. She was just a phase. I tried to hold my head high, but the heat in my cheeks betrayed me. My own sister leaned over and said in a voice too casual to be kind, well, you were always the sentimental one. Maybe you'll grow tomatoes or something. That should have been the worst of it. But then my brother-in-law stood up, grabbed his coat, and said loud enough for everyone to hear. So, the caretaker gets the garden shed, and the real family gets the keys to the kingdom. Makes sense. I didn't respond. I couldn't. My mouth had gone dry, my chest tight with the kind of pain that doesn't cry. It hardens. The attorney handed me a small envelope and a folded map. You'll need this to locate the place. It's not listed on GPS. Of course it wasn't. By the time we got back to the family house, his family house, they were already packing my things. Neatly folded. Labeled. Placed by the door like I was a visitor who had overstayed her welcome. No one met my eyes. No one asked if I was okay. Even the housekeeper I once taught to make cornbread from scratch gave me a look that said, don't make this harder than it is. And then my sister, my blood, stood in the hallway and said flatly, "You were always more of a liability than a partner. We just never said it out loud." I didn't cry. I didn't beg. I just picked up the box with my name scribbled in black marker, stepped outside and closed the door behind me. Don't be the one who finds stories like this after life hits you. Subscribe now or regret it when it's too late to say, "I should have known." I met Charles on a Thursday. I remember because I had just come from work, exhausted, carrying 2 bags of groceries and a heart that had started giving up on love. He bumped into me near the market gate, apologized, and insisted on helping me carry my bags. He was charming. The kind of charming that doesn't scream for attention but lingers, like a warm coat on a cold day. He listened when I spoke, really listened, and when he asked what I dreamed about doing, I told him without shame. I wanted to run a center for women, for people like my mother, for people like me. He smiled and said, "You shouldn't have to build the world alone. Let me help." I hadn't heard words like that before. Not from a man. 2 months later he proposed. It felt fast, but everything felt warm, wrapped in ribbons and reassurances. He made me feel seen. The wedding was simple. He said he didn't believe in grand shows, that the real celebration would be in how we built our lives together. I agreed. I always agreed with him back then. A year in, I quit my job. He said it was silly for a wife to be hustling for paychecks when her husband could provide. "You're too refined for all that office stress," he'd whisper, kissing my forehead. Another year, I found myself making excuses for missing every gathering with friends. "Charles says we need time to ourselves. Charles isn't feeling well today. Charles doesn't like when I go out alone." One by one, the calls stopped. The texts slowed down. Eventually, the silence became a new kind of normal. That was the year he brought his son to live with us. Nathaniel. A teenage boy with eyes colder than December rain, and a heart I could never reach. He called me by my first name, never Mom, never Auntie, just Lillian. He never hid how he felt. I was a stranger, a nuisance. And Charles never corrected him. If anything, he rewarded the disrespect with larger allowances, more privileges, fewer rules. I'd cook, and Nathaniel would scrape the food into the trash. I'd speak, and he'd walk away mid-sentence. I'd try to connect, and Charles would say, "Boys will be boys. Don't take it personally," but it was personal. It became painfully personal the day Charles said he was putting the house in Nathaniel's name, for long-term planning, he claimed. Security for the future. I was standing in the kitchen when he told me. The rice on the stove burned while I stared at him, my hands trembling, my voice gone. Still I stayed. I told myself it was love. That love required sacrifice. That maybe, just maybe, I was too sensitive. By the 4th year I had stopped recognizing myself. My clothes were always plain. My voice always soft. My questions always filtered so I wouldn't seem like a burden. Charles had perfected the art of subtle cruelty. Compliments laced with criticism, comparisons meant to humble me, praise withheld like oxygen. And when Nathaniel's mother died and he moved in for good, the balance shifted even more. It was no longer our house. It was theirs. They laughed in rooms I wasn't invited into. They made plans without consulting me. Nathaniel once joked that I was just the cleaning lady with a ring. Charles didn't defend me. He only said, "Don't start drama." I slept in silence most nights, facing the wall, wondering when I became so small. Then one morning Charles handed me a sealed envelope with my name on it. Inside was a voucher for a spa day. I smiled, thinking maybe he wanted to reconnect, but when I returned that evening, every photo of me in the living room was gone. Moved. Replaced. As if I'd never existed. I stood in that room with the scent of lavender still clinging to my sweater and knew. Whatever this was, it wasn't love. But I stayed. Because when you give up everything, you cling to anything that looks like purpose. Even if it's eating you alive. After the will was read, it was like a switch flipped in everyone's eyes. I wasn't the wife anymore. I wasn't even part of the conversation. I became invisible. The very next day, I noticed the shift. Calls from so-called friends went unanswered. The few who did reply gave half smiles and pitiful glances. Some said they were shocked, but none offered a place to stay. None said, "Come over, let's talk." They just disappeared. Even my church friends, The ones who used to praise my loyalty and call me a pillar, stopped responding. Loyalty only matters when you're useful. I remember knocking on my sister-in-law Emma's door one evening, hoping to get clarity. I had nothing left to lose. I asked her plainly, "Did you all know about the will?" She didn't flinch. She didn't pretend. She leaned against her doorway with a shrug and said, "You should have seen this coming. You were just the caretaker, Lillian. He loved you, sure, but you were always temporary." That word hit harder than the slap my mother gave me when I eloped with Charles against her advice. I stood there trying to hold myself up, but her next words finished me. "Don't embarrass yourself. The city house isn't yours. Don't make us involve the law." That night, I returned to what used to be our home and walked into a gathering I wasn't invited to. Nathaniel had guests over. His friends, cousins, some of Charles's extended family. Laughter filled the room. Wine flowed like water. Music played loudly, and there I was, in the same dress I wore to the will reading, standing in the doorway like an uninvited ghost. He saw me. "Nathaniel." He looked straight at me and raised his glass. "She's still here," he said with a smirk. "Aunt Lillian, we thought you'd be gone by now." Everyone laughed. I didn't respond. I went to the bedroom, closed the door, and began folding my clothes in silence. No one helped. No one knocked. I had no boxes. Only 2 large traveling bags I had used on our honeymoon years ago. I packed each item with care. Not because I needed them, but because it was the only dignity I had left to hold on to. One of the maids passed by the door and paused. Our eyes met. But she looked away and kept walking. Even the help knew I no longer belonged. By the time I zipped up my last bag, the music was louder, the laughter bolder. And just as I stepped out into the corridor with both bags in hand, Nathaniel stood there blocking the hallway. "Don't forget to leave the keys," he said. "We've changed the locks tomorrow." I didn't say a word. I handed him the ring of keys, walked out the front door, and stepped into a night colder than any I had ever known. Outside, the rain had started. It was light at first, then heavier, then relentless. The taxi I called never came, so I walked. Through puddles, through mud, through streets that used to feel like home. At the bus terminal, the man behind the counter looked me up and down and asked, "One way?" I nodded. "Destination, ma'am?" She should respond. "Wheatland Hollow. Off the old county road. You know it." He raises his brow. "That place still standing?" I gave a sad smile. "That place," I repeated. The bus ride was 6 hours long. 6 hours of fogged windows, squeaky wipers, and the sound of coughing passengers and crying babies. I sat at the very back, drenched and cold, cradling my bag like a life vest. No one spoke to me. Not that night. And somewhere along the bumpy, winding road, I started crying without realizing it. Tears that made no sound but soaked through my scarf. I wasn't crying for what I lost. I was crying for what I never truly had. By the time the bus reached Wheatland Hollow, dawn had broken. The sun wasn't shining. It was veiled behind a thick curtain of gray clouds, more shadow than light. I stepped down onto the muddy earth, my shoes already soaked, and looked around. There was nothing familiar here. Just silence. Palm trees leaning like tired guards, rusted rooftops in the distance, and the sound of distant goats and crackling radios. I flagged down a motorcycle. The rider didn't say much, just gave my bags a long look and asked, "Where you headed?" "Wheatland Hollow," I said. His eyes narrowed. "You mean the old Johnson place?" I nodded. He paused, then muttered, "Folks say that place never lets anyone leave whole." I didn't answer. What more could it take from me? The ride to the cottage was slow and painful. Every bump on the narrow road rattled my bones. Trees grew wildly on either side. I could hardly see the sky above, just thick leaves like arms closing in. And then, after what felt like forever, we turned into a narrow path where the grass nearly swallowed the tires. There it was. The cottage. My inheritance. It stood crooked behind a rusted gate, half hidden by overgrown brush. The walls were coated in years of neglect. Peeling paint, moss stains wood chewed soft by termites. The windows were boarded shut, and the front porch sagged like an old man's spine. But beneath all that ruin, I saw something, or maybe felt it. The shape was unmistakably colonial. Arched windows, high beams, old stone. This place had once been grand, loved, chosen, just forgotten. The rider dropped my bags by the gate, shook his head and muttered, "God be with you," before pulling off in a cloud of dust. I walked up the creaking steps, each groan of the wood echoing like a warning. I reached into my bag and pulled out the key. It still fit. With a deep breath, I opened the door. The smell hit me first. Old wood, stale air, mildew, and something else. A scent like aged books and long-held memories. Inside, the air was thick. Cobwebs stretched across corners like forgotten lullabies. Furniture was draped in white sheets, some torn, some clinging like ghosts refusing to let go. I moved slowly, my shoes crunching across broken tiles and old papers. The living room had a fireplace that hadn't seen flame in decades. There were family portraits on the wall, black and white, eyes staring blankly, silently. I reached what used to be the dining room. Empty. The kitchen. Nothing but rusted pots and rat droppings. But then I turned the corner into a narrow hallway, and there it was. A small door. Slightly ajar. I pushed it open, and found a room. One room untouched by time. Dust floated in the light leaking through cracked shutters. A wooden writing desk sat beneath the window, covered in leather-bound journals. A globe in the corner. Books on law, medicine, war. A coat still hanging behind the door. My husband's coat. I didn't understand. This room was preserved, like someone had cared for it. Protected it. I stepped forward, fingers trembling, and brushed away a layer of dust from the desk. That's when I saw it. A trunk. Pushed gently under the desk. Dusty, wooden, and clearly aged. But carved into the top, barely visible beneath time and grime, was my name. Lillian. Just that. Nothing more. My knees gave way as I dropped to the floor. With trembling fingers, I pulled the trunk toward me. It creaked as I opened it, resisting, almost groaning in protest. Inside, documents. Sealed envelopes. Some with my name. Others without. Some marked confidential. Others dated back over 20 years. A bundle of old keys tied with red thread. A small box, velvet-lined, containing a necklace I hadn't seen since our wedding night. And then at the very bottom, a folded letter, yellowed with age. I picked it up, heart pounding. But I didn't open it. Not yet. Not there. Instead, I sat on the floor of that quiet, untouched room, surrounded by proof that something had been hidden from me. Something important. And for the first time since Charles's death, I felt something shift. Something stir inside me. It wasn't anger. It wasn't grief. It was possibility. I waited until morning before I opened the first letter. There was something sacred about the stillness. No phone ringing. No footsteps. No voices telling me what I should have done, who I wasn't, or what I would never be. Just the soft chirp of birds outside the cracked window, and my fingers trembling over faded paper. The first envelope had no name. Just the word, begin. The handwriting was familiar, elegant but rushed. My husband's. I unfolded it gently. Lillian, if you're reading this, then I've already gone. And I doubt you were given what I truly left for you. I paused. My throat clenched. I read on. There are things I should have said years ago, but I didn't know how. I loved you. God help me, I did. But loving you became the one thing I had to do quietly, because loving you made the others hate me. And I was too much of a coward to fight them. The words blurred. My hands trembled. You think I gave that boy the apartment because I loved him more. I didn't. He threatened me. Told me he would destroy everything. Take what little name I had left. He knew about the affair I had before I met you. He found the letters. The pictures. He said he'd tell the board, the press, your church. I didn't want that shame to fall on you. My breath caught. I remembered that week when he came home quiet, withdrawn. When he burned papers in the backyard and told me to stay inside. He never told me what it was. I'm ashamed. I let fear lead me. I let that boy, who never once called you mother, take what I promised to you. And the worst part, Lillian? I watched them humiliate you at my funeral, and I knew it would happen. I knew. I closed my eyes. Even from the grave, the shame was still alive. Beneath that letter were more. Some unopened, some stained with age, others wrapped tightly with twine. I untied the bundle and a photograph fell out. It was of me young laughing at a beach I had nearly forgotten. He had taken it on our 3rd anniversary. I was barefoot chasing waves. On the back he had scribbled, "The day I decided I could never leave her." I reached for the next envelope and found receipts. Transfers to a builder in this very village dated 10 years ago. Paint, roofing, plumbing. A handwritten note in the margins. Fix everything before she sees it. But it had never been fixed. Because after that receipt, there was nothing. No more records. No contractor notes. Just silence. He had stopped the repairs halfway. Why? I kept digging. Beneath the envelopes was a black, rectangular device, an old-fashioned voice recorder. The kind he used when he was still lecturing. I hesitated, then pressed play. His voice came on thinner, weaker. You could hear the fatigue in his breath. "If this doesn't make it to you, Lillian, maybe it's for the best. But I have to say it somewhere. I bought the apartment in the city with your name on the papers. The plan was always to leave it to you. But Nathaniel came to my office. He said if I didn't change the will, he would leak everything. And worse, he threatened you. He said you didn't deserve it. That you were nothing more than a helper who overstayed her welcome. And God forgive me, I listened." There was a pause. He coughed, gasped, then continued.
"I'm sick, Lillian.
Sicker than I let you know. They say the lungs are going fast.
I'm scared.
I don't want to die alone." I kept thinking, if I gave them what they wanted, they'd be kind. They'd come back. They'd sit with me. But none of them did. Not even Nathaniel. I changed the will. And even after I did, I died alone. Static buzz for a second. Then a softer tone. "I left you more. I had to. You'll find it. In the study. Look beneath the floorboards under the desk." The recording ended. I didn't cry. I didn't scream. I just sat there. With years of unanswered questions finally screaming answers at me. He loved me. And he failed me. And now maybe I could finally face the truth. Not the version they fed me. Not the version I lived with in silence. The real truth. I stood up, legs unsteady, heart heavy, and I turned toward the writing desk. Toward the secrets hidden beneath the floor. Toward whatever he had buried, hoping one day I'd find it. The rest of the house had given up. But this one room, still remembered me. The floor creaked as I knelt beside the desk. Dust floated in shafts of morning light, like soft ghosts waiting to speak. I ran my hands along the wooden boards until I found one, slightly looser than the rest. My fingernails slid under the edge. I pried it open gently. And there, buried beneath the floor, was a metal box. Heavy. Locked. But the key was already in my pocket, taped behind the last letter in the trunk. It clicked open with a sound that felt like thunder in the quiet room. Inside was not what I expected. Not love letters. Not regrets. But power. Stacks of documents. Tied in ribbon. A velvet pouch. A sealed envelope. And beneath it all cold, glimmering coins that caught the light like they hadn't seen daylight in years. I opened the pouch first. Gold coins. Minted decades ago. Carefully preserved. Enough to pay for a life I was never offered. Each one inscribed with the face of a different era. As if time itself had been saving something for me. I reached for the envelope. It was embossed, thicker paper. Not my husband's handwriting. Inside a letter. "Mrs. Lillian Whitmore. If you're reading this, then he trusted you with the truth. Your husband instructed me, months before his death, to secure certain assets. He feared they would be destroyed or stolen by the family if left openly in the will. Enclosed, you will find property deeds. Not 1, not 2, but 5. All purchased in your name. 2 here in this village. 1 in the city. 1 overseas. And 1, perhaps the most precious of all, in your hometown. The home you once told him you missed, has been rebuilt. Quietly. Brick by brick. My heart stopped. The lawyer had signed it by hand. With a final note. He said, they gave her the cottage because they thought it was a punishment. But I gave her the rest, because I knew she'd be the only one strong enough to build from ashes. You are far from finished. I unfolded the deeds. Official. Legal. A hidden account number was scribbled at the bottom of one page. I stared at it. My name printed in bold above a foreign bank emblem I didn't recognize. He had lied to me. But for once, he lied in my favor. My hands trembled, not from grief, but power. They thought they had sent me into exile. They thought they buried me in ruins. But in their cruelty they pushed me into something far greater. This house was never meant to break me. It was meant to awaken me. I stood up slowly, staring around the dusty room. No longer a place of abandonment. Now a vault. A monument. A beginning. And somewhere in the village, beneath years of overgrowth and neglect, were more keys, more walls, more chapters of the life I was denied. Now they would see. Now they would all see. If this twist shocked you, imagine what else you're missing by not subscribing. These aren't just stories, they're warnings in disguise. Subscribe now before real life writes a version of this with your name in it. The next morning I didn't cry. I didn't linger by the trunk. I didn't touch the gold or count the deeds again. Instead, I stepped outside barefoot, into the overgrown grass, the cold earth greeting me like an old friend I'd left behind long ago. I made a decision. This house would rise again, and so would I. I walked into the village that once felt like exile and hired 3 women. Widows like me, heads wrapped in faded scarves, backs bent from years of bowing to life. At first, they eyed me with suspicion. I was the outsider, the abandoned wife of the man with city shoes and big talk. But when I paid them up front, in full, their eyes changed. They saw something they hadn't seen in a long time. Respect. We started with the roof. Rotten wood came down. New beams went up. Every nail driven into that cottage felt like a stitch closing a wound deep inside me. Then came the kitchen. The sink was rusted through. The cabinets were crawling with termites. We stripped it to the studs and built it back from scratch. I learned to cook over an open fire again. No gas, just hands, heat, and instinct. I planted a small garden, tomatoes, okra, collards. Each morning, I watered them with hands that once shook from heartbreak. Now they trembled from the weight of planting hope. At night I wrote, not in a diary, a blueprint. I made lists, set goals, and then I wrote down the names of every woman who had ever pitied me. Beside each one, I wrote just one word. Wait. One afternoon while gathering firewood, I met her, Miss Agatha, the schoolteacher. Young, sharp-eyed, glasses too big for her face, but her gaze didn't miss a thing. She looked me over. I heard they left you with the ghost house, she said. I smiled. The ghost is gone, I told her. I'm here now. She laughed. By the end of the week, she brought 4 other women to my cottage. One of them had a black eye. One was afraid to speak. One was pregnant and abandoned. One just wanted silence. We sat on the porch in the evening breeze. We didn't talk much that first day. We just peeled cassava, shared groundnuts, sipped palm wine. No one judged. No one explained. No one had to. That's how our group began. No name. Just space, sacred, safe, soft. The cottage became more than wood and walls. It became a shelter, a meeting ground, a classroom for healing, a refuge for women who were told they were too much, not enough, or a burden. I bought new curtains, hung them myself, painted the living room pale yellow, scrubbed the floor until my knees ached, cooked for visitors, laughed without waiting for permission, slept without fear of footsteps or locked doors behind me. One night, I caught my reflection in the window. My face had changed. The sadness was still there, but it had shifted. Now it lived behind my eyes, like a quiet witness, not a captor. I whispered to myself, I am not a guest in my own story anymore. No one knew the full truth yet. They still thought I was rebuilding a house. But what I was truly rebuilding was a life that had been stolen in pieces. And now, I was taking every piece back. Silently. Deliberately, without asking anyone's permission. This wasn't revenge. This was reclamation. And the walls around me weren't just shelter. They were proof that a woman who is left with nothing can still build something no one else can ever take again. Revenge is loud in movies. But in real life, the loudest revenge is silence dressed in strategy. I didn't call anyone. Didn't march back into the city screaming injustice. Didn't post on social media. Didn't chase sympathy. No. I sat with a tall glass of sweet tea, let the coolness calm me, and began. The first thing I did was call the number buried in one of the envelopes I found, my husband's lawyer. The man who had written the letter that ended with, "You're far from finished." When he heard my voice, there was a pause. "I've been waiting for this call," he said. We met quietly at a neutral office in the next town. I dressed modestly. I told him everything. The will, the fake signatures I had found, the properties hidden, the threats my husband hinted at in his recordings. He nodded slowly. Then he opened a file. Inside were the documents I needed to reclaim everything that had been stolen behind my back. "Your stepson," he said plainly, "forged at least 3 documents to redirect the city apartment. Your husband knew, but he was scared. Scared of a boy he raised. A boy who had grown into a predator in a suit." I updated my own will that same day. Everything, every coin, every house, every piece of gold was redirected. Not to any blood relative. Not to any family member who had laughed while I packed my bags. To women like me. To the ones who stayed silent, who poured everything into men who treated them like shadows. But I wasn't done. I sent an anonymous report to the city's anti-corruption unit. I didn't need credit. Just the truth. I included scanned copies of the fake receipts. The bank account printouts. The recordings where my husband admitted his son had blackmailed him. The best part? I sent it from a dusty internet cafe 2 towns away, using a new name I'd borrowed from one of my grandmother's old recipe books. Then, I did something my old self would never have dared. I started a scholarship. In my husband's name. But only for orphans. Only for the forgotten. No family strings. Only the children who had nothing, and still dared to dream. I worked with Miss Agatha, the schoolteacher. We launched it in the town hall with only 8 people present. No press. Just one small banner, one big pot of food, and a promise. "I give this," I said to the children, "because I know what it's like to be left behind. But I also know what it's like to rise." I walked back home that evening, barefoot again, as the sky shifted pink above the cottage. I didn't need revenge to taste like fire. For me, it tasted like quiet power. Like dignity returned. Like every woman who had been made to feel invisible, finally being seen, if only by herself. I didn't wait for karma. I became it. It started like a whisper in the wind, barely noticeable. Then it turned into thunder. My stepson, so proud, so polished, so painfully arrogant, woke up one morning to a knock at his penthouse door. It wasn't breakfast. It was the police. Search warrant in hand, faces stern and silent. They moved past him like he was air. He stammered, shouted, demanded to call someone. Anyone. No one answered. His accounts were frozen that same hour. Over $200,000, locked out of reach. The luxury cars? Seized. The luxury watches? Evidence. The same city where he used to throw lavish parties was now whispering about him. Rumors became headlines. Headlines turned into hashtags. And then the final nail. His girlfriend. The one he used to parade around like a trophy. The one who once laughed when I was kicked out of the family house. She posted a live video from the apartment he bought her. She showed receipts, proof of hush money, proof he had forced my husband to change property titles, proof he laundered funds through charity fronts. "Ask him where the money came from," she said, her voice trembling. "Ask him how many lives he stepped on to wear those shoes." Over 100,000 views in under an hour. The comment section was brutal. People demanded justice. Others posted stories of how he had scammed them. Former clients, ex-friends, even old teachers. Everyone came out of the shadows. He became a pariah overnight. Even his so-called friends, the men he once drank whiskey with while laughing about useless widows, distanced themselves. Publicly. Loudly. I didn't smile. I didn't laugh. I just lit a candle that night, placed it by the writing desk my husband left untouched, and whispered, "You were right to be afraid of him. But you should have trusted me." No one knew the woman in the village cottage had pulled the first thread that unraveled his kingdom. No one knew the silence they dismissed as weakness was a shield, one I had sharpened into a sword. And while he cried behind closed doors, while he begged for help, for understanding, for a second chance, I planted more collards. Made soup for the orphans. Sang with the women's group. And finally I started sleeping through the night. If you've ever been betrayed and kept quiet, this is your home. But if you'd rather scroll past and pretend this doesn't happen, go ahead. Speech balloon. The comments are open for people like you. Why won't you subscribe? I was in the garden when I heard tires crunch against the gravel. Not one car. 3. Black, shiny, unfamiliar in a village that still held its breath when new things arrived. I didn't rush to meet them. Didn't wipe my hands. Didn't straighten my scarf. Let them see me as I was. Earth under my nails, strength in my spine. When I reached the gate, I saw them. My sister. My stepson's ex-girlfriend, now playing peacemaker. My sister-in-law. The one who called me a caretaker. They weren't smiling. Just faces worn by scandal, regret, and something else. Disbelief. The gate was now solid iron, vines trained neatly along its curves. Beyond it, the once abandoned cottage now stood like a queen risen from exile, painted, polished, proud. The women stared like they had stepped into the wrong reality. My sister's voice cracked first. We didn't know. You were suffering like that. I looked at her, really looked. The same sister who turned her back when I begged for a place to stay. The same sister who handed me a plastic bag of my belongings and said, "Go before you embarrass us further." I unlocked the gate slowly, motioned them in. "You didn't care to ask," I said, then turned and walked ahead. They followed in silence. The inside of the house was warm, glowing with sunlight filtered through linen curtains. The air smelled of stew and fresh herbs. Books lined the once empty shelves. Children's drawings decorated one corner, gifts from the orphans I sponsored. In the sitting room, they shifted uncomfortably on chairs that weren't meant for gossip or judgment anymore. My sister-in-law cleared her throat. We were hoping to speak, maybe clear the air. We've all made mistakes. I nodded. Yes. Some mistakes were loud. Others were silent. But all of them were choices. She blinked, unsure how to respond. The ex-girlfriend was quiet, but she kept looking around, her gaze soft. Perhaps realizing that the woman they once pitied had built a kingdom with her bare hands. "I just want you to know," my sister whispered. "I'm proud of you. And I'm sorry." I leaned forward, poured tea into 3 clean cups, then spoke slowly. Pride is easy from a distance. Apologies are heavier when they come after the damage is done. But thank you. I accept the apology. I don't accept the rewriting of history. Their faces fell, but I didn't stop. This house, this life wasn't built on forgiveness. It was built on truth, grief, and the kind of silence that teaches you who you really are. I stood. I'm not angry. I'm not bitter. But I've changed. I walked them out after tea, stood by the gate as they returned to their cars. My sister turned back once more. "Will you come visit the city?" I smiled. A soft, quiet smile. The city taught me to disappear. This village helped me return. So no. But you can write. As the cars disappeared into the road I once arrived on, soaking wet, abandoned and humiliated, I turned back toward my home. Not a cottage. Not an inheritance. A declaration that I was no longer a footnote in someone else's story. I had become the author. It began with a question whispered one evening under the moonlight. What if there was a place for women like us? The teacher had said it in passing as we watched a widow, barely 30, sit at the edge of her compound, head wrapped tight with shame, hands trembling over nothing. I remembered that look. I had worn it once. And I knew exactly how heavy silence could be when nobody asks if you're okay. The idea rooted in me that night, quietly, like the first seed of a stubborn tree. Weeks passed. I met with elders, secured more land, and began building, not just with bricks but with memory, empathy, and stubborn hope. It became a retreat center. No plaque, no ceremony. Just a home for widows, battered women, and the forgotten. They came one by one. Some barefoot, some clutching broken photographs, some with babies strapped to their backs and nothing else. They all had different stories. But the pain was universal. We cooked together. We cried together. And slowly, painfully, we healed together. I taught them how to build, how to farm, how to defend themselves, how to write down their stories so they would never be erased again. I stood in front of them one evening, sunlight dancing through the neem trees, and said, they called me useless. They left me with nothing. But I wasn't useless. I was unheard. And I refused to stay quiet ever again. That night they sang. Not songs of sorrow, but of survival. Girls who had once hidden behind their grief now raised their voices like thunder. One day, a young woman from another village came to me with tears in her eyes and said, "Your story saved mine." And I realized, all those years of being silenced, displaced, betrayed, they were never wasted. They were repurposed. Now I sit each morning on the front steps of the house that was once crumbling, coffee in hand, letters from women all over the country tucked beside me. I look out at the gardens, the laughter echoing from the courtyard where wounded hearts now play. And sometimes I look in the mirror, not to fix anything, but to honor everything. I was never useless, I whisper. I was just unheard. And now, they hear me. And if you're still here listening, maybe you're one of us. This channel isn't for the perfect. It's for the hurt, the betrayed, the quiet warriors who never got to scream. If that's you, subscribe and never feel alone again. It was a quiet evening. The type where the sky turns lilac and the wind carries forgotten songs through the windows. I was dusting the old bookshelf in the cottage, now restored, alive, humming with warmth, when my hand brushed against a thick, weathered Bible. It wasn't mine. It was his. The pages were yellowed, delicate. Tucked near the back, just behind the torn leather flap, was a folded piece of paper. Old ink. Slightly smudged. My name scrawled across the top. My breath caught. It wasn't dated, but the handwriting was friendlier than I remembered. I opened it slowly, my fingers trembling. If you're reading this, it means you stayed. You survived the storm they made of you. I know I failed you. I let fear steal my spine and let guilt dress itself up as love. But not a day went by that I didn't see you. Truly see you. Your strength terrified them. Your S. It wasn't the apology I had once begged the universe for. It was better. It was truth. I closed the Bible gently and placed it on the table beside the window where the morning light hit just right. And in that quiet moment, I finally understood. I wasn't left with nothing. I was left with a chance to finally become everything. Not the background of someone else's legacy. Not the footnote in their story. But the author of my own. And maybe, that was the real inheritance. Have you ever been given less, only to find out it was all you needed?